Now then everybody, this is the Wedding Mavericks podcast, a podcast for wedding photographers and videographers who want to build successful and sustainable businesses. My name is Jules and I'm joined by Lindsay, and on this episode we are going to be discussing pricing.
So, how are we doing? It's been a few
You're asking
weeks. Me? I'm asking you, I'm asking them, I'm asking everybody. How are we doing? Yes, it is. We're into the last week of February 2023. They are flying by. Yeah, goodness. So, since we last saw you, spoke to you, we've of course had Valentine's Day. We hope that brought even a plethora of newly engaged couples and inquiries your way. And if you've already made a start on wedding season, we hope that those are going well so far and that you are enjoying the nice kind of more leisurely
hopefully more
pace.
Sedate pace.
Yeah. But equally, that you've also been able to spend a little bit of time on the business side of your wedding photography, videography business, and that's going quite well for you too. Okay.
Did you set them goals?
Yeah. Have you thought about your money and taxes?
Yeah.
Do you know your numbers? So yeah, today we're going to be talking about pricing. It is, because it can be one of the most difficult things to work out, I think, when it comes to running your business, because there's lots of different options that are available and lots of different opinions as well that people have on this particular topic. It is quite a hot potato, as it were, especially in sort of groups and things that we see. And so, in line with, I guess, the things that I was just recapping on there of what we've covered in the previous episodes, it just naturally is, I think, one of the points in the year where you're going to be having a look at not only your pricing, but also you're going to be considering the pricing of your competitors also. Something that we do see often in the groups, and just last week was a good example, not a good example, but an example of just what a sensitive subject this can be from people, because it can be quite an emotive subject and really generally a lot of kind of opinion, but conflict as well. And what you tend to see is a lot of sort of criticism of people who themselves might be positioned within a particular price bracket, and there's conflict with those that are in, I'll say, a different price bracket.
Yeah.
And some people will be at, not some people, but we're all at different stages within the kind of business journey and within the kind of life of our business. And there are lots and lots of different factors that affect it, of which we're going to cover today. But there is none more so than the subject of pricing than I observe that really, really brings out the conflict.
Yeah,
and
it
the
polarises
opinions.
people a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's not always helpful, I should say. Not always productive and not always helpful are the things that you tend to see.
It's something that should be discussed more openly, because that would be helpful if people were more honest and open about pricing.
Yeah.
I think that if people who are in a position, and this is why we want to talk about it, because if you're in a position where you can give people an insight and help them understand kind of, if they're earlier on in their journeys than you are, you can help them understand what probably will happen with their prices and what they might experience. It's going to be different for everybody. Everyone's different. That's what we're going to be talking about. But, what might happen, then it probably would help everybody to charge. We're not going to say more, because that's not the key here. It's not about charging more. It's about charging the right amount. And we'll use a term that we say a lot, a successful and sustainable business.
Yeah.
It would be helpful, I think, if people were more open and honest. But it doesn't help when people are kind of being critical.
Yeah. Because I think what's important really is for you to understand why you charge what you charge. Okay, that's nobody else's decision, that's your decision. It should be backed by some kind of strategy. There should be a strategy to your pricing, and you should absolutely be feeling confident in presenting that to your couples. Okay, regardless of the stage that you're at in your business, but if you've made a decision about your pricing, then know why you are charging that and feel confident in it. Because if you don't, then the couples that you're presenting it to sure as heck aren't going to feel confident in what you're trying. You know, if you're coming across and sounding a little bit like, it's this much.
Yeah, or flim-flamming, you know, like 1 minute it's this much, next minute it's this much, and not being able to kind of back that up with any kind of, you know, I'm going to be able to do it for you on this amount because of X, Y, and Z, but just you know, if you come across like you're making it up as you go along, you're not going to be able to get there. No. And you know, some couples will be looking, you know, a lot of this is to do with you. It shouldn't really be to do with the couples. There'll always be couples looking to pay a certain amount for certain services. It doesn't necessarily correlate to the amount they're spending on the wedding, and it doesn't necessarily correlate to the amount of money that those people have. It's about what they want to spend their money on, about what they value a lot of the time. So you will find that it doesn't, you know, just because they're having a wedding there and you're thinking, well, that they must be spending this much on a photographer or videographer. Don't just assume that that's going to be the case. But also, you know, it should be about you. And what we're going to go through now is what the things you need to be thinking about with your pricing to be able to do it properly. Because it's all right charging what people want to pay, but if that's not enough to sustain your business successfully, then there's no point. It's not going to work in the long run. Sorry, I butted in again.
No, that's okay, because you're absolutely right. So that's the bottom line, isn't it? So once again, a business that's sustainable for you, we have to, in making decisions on our pricing, we have to find the right balance that's going to help us to achieve our goals ultimately, don't we? You know, for us personally, as well as raising our prices as we developed our business, we've also changed the structure of our pricing lots of times. And we've done that because we needed the knowledge of testing different things. We need to understand what works and doesn't work. And just a couple of months ago, you know, we were talking to you about the fact that we'd had lots of leads generated based on the marketing that we were doing, but we hadn't had a booking in 6 months. And what we decided to do was make a tweak to the structure of the pricing and how it was presented to the couples. And within doing that, within 2 weeks, I think it was 3 bookings that we ended up getting within that short period of time. So yes, we're talking today about pricing and being confident in it, having a strategy to understanding it. But with that also understand it's not just about the amount in pounds or dollars that people are going to see. It's how it's structured also.
Absolutely. So what we want this to be is a no-nonsense, hopefully helpful discussion on what is, you know, this weird kind of polarising topic that actually shouldn't be one at all. It should be quite a straightforward topic. And it's, you know, a lot of people are quite guarded about it as well. You know, they'll talk about you should be charging this, you should be charging that. But when it comes to, well, what do you charge? People don't necessarily like to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it. And yeah, this is going to be more relevant to the UK market because that's where we are, and we can't really, you know, split up each area and talk about them individually. Plus, we don't really have the same knowledge of, like, you know, the more Central European market or the US market or the Asian market. You know, we don't have that understanding in the same way that we do of the UK market. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. But I would say that these principles and even these amounts will be, you know, there'll be some correlation to different parts of the world where there might be, you know, similar price brackets. They'll just be slightly lower or slightly higher. That's what I would kind of say. So what we're going to cover going forward from here, it's going to be quite quick fire, this one, hopefully. We've got a short space of time to record this, so we're gonna try and get it done succinctly. But we've always said that. So
is that another S?
That's another six. Yeah. So why pricing? So what we're going to be covering is why pricing differs so much. Why figuring out what to charge is so important to the success and sustainability of your business. We will discuss the changes that we've seen in pricing over the last 6 years that we've been in the wedding industry. We'll talk about the brackets of pricing, the amounts that people are typically charging across the UK based on quite a bit of research that we've carried out. And we will be discussing our own pricing journey and where we're at now. And then finally, we're going to go through a strategy, hopefully that you can use if you want to try and work out your own pricing in a sustainable way. It's based around the sort of principles that we've used and developed over the years. So let's start off by asking the question of why does pricing differ so much, Lindsay? It's a big question. It's going to be down to multiple things. They're not all necessarily within your control, but they are within your preference. You can choose these things in a way based on the sorts of market or the sorts of clients that you're wanting to do, the sorts of venues you're wanting to shoot at, things like that. So there's always going to be the general demographic and circumstantial reasons. And I should just caveat that we're going to be talking about pricing in relation to both photography and videography, because not necessarily doing them as a joint package, but just I would say that at this moment, photography and videography are they're on a similar price level, if that makes sense. I would say that when we first started, videography was undervalued, and so photography, generally people paid more for photography, or that's what we saw in general. I'm not saying every single wedding and every single couple and every single videographer or photographer, that's how it was, but generally. Whereas I think generally now, the pricing is more comparable. Yeah. Certainly here in the UK anyway. So there's always going to be those general demographic or circumstantial reasons. For example, areas where people are based, whether this is internationally or nationally. So we can say that we are in the UK, and there is a general a general consensus, shall we say, not understanding, that the north of the country is somewhat considered to be poorer than the south. That is an absolute generalised stereotype, because it isn't quite like that at all. There are poorer and richer areas around the country. And there are certainly, in the north where we live, there are certainly some very affluent areas. In some respects, even more so than down south, because there's a lot of land in the north. A lot of people own a lot of land in the north. So there's a lot of very rich people living in the north of England. And there's a lot of nice wedding venues in the north of England. But I think that generally everybody knows that the UK, a lot of the wealth and a lot of the, because of the price difference in living down south to living up north, things cost more down south, housing costs more, it generally costs more to live, and wages are usually higher in the south of the country. So therefore, things generally cost a bit more around London, around the southeast, somewhat towards the southwest. So there's a bit of a difference there, and that will be the same wherever you are. So different parts, certainly I know different parts of the US, from what I've heard, a wedding in New York or in California is going to be costing a completely different amount to somewhere in Central America. Not Central America, but Central US, as in some of the central states. So how much a photographer or videographer is going to be charging for those weddings is going to also be more or less, depending on where people are getting married. The types of clients. So again, in all of the areas, you're going to get different budgets, different types of clients. Clients who've got more money, clients who value place value on certain things like memories, photography, videography. Maybe it's a stylistic thing. Maybe it's I want to look good on social media, or like the value of the memory thing is important. So people will place higher value on things, and within the sectors of the market as well. So you're always going to have your lower end weddings, your mid-range weddings, your higher end weddings, and then like your super rich weddings. We're going to go on to talk about that in a second. But people are going to have budgets that they've allocated or have in mind, and that's kind of what they're gonna spend. And depending on where they're getting married, what type of venue they're getting married at, how much they're paying for the venue and things like that will probably determine what you're going to be able to charge them for photography or videography. Then there's a level of work. How good you work, how experienced are you, how good at marketing are you? Are your films and photos similar to everybody else's, or are you doing something that's different, or are you doing something that's deemed better, as in it's higher quality? These are all things that are subjective. So what one person thinks is good, another person might not. And so there isn't really a fine line with that, but I guess there's a general standard of like, if you're above this standard, you're probably able to charge, mid to high end prices. And if you're below that standard, you're probably going to be charging lower. And everybody gets to that stage at a different point in their career, I guess. Yeah. But the main thing that's going to influence your pricing over the longer term is going to be your individual circumstances and your business plan or strategy. So, where do you want to work? Are you happy to travel? Like if we wanted to travel all the time, we'd be doing international weddings, going abroad to like places like, if people get married in Italy or Spain or Greece, and they were getting married and they were spending a lot on their wedding, they wanted something very specific. There are people that want to spend that. In the south of England, maybe they are going to be generally spending more. So whenever we go down south to do a wedding, it does tend to be easier to convert those people at higher price points than local to us. That's a general rule of thumb, and that's because of the things we've talked about. So it's what we want. Do we want to be having to drive 3, 4, 5, 6 hours or fly somewhere for a wedding? Or do we want to be able to drive half an hour or less, or maybe at most an hour or two? And, what's the right balance for you? Yeah. Your own individual circumstances. So what's your costs? What's your cost of doing business? What's your personal living expenses? What do you want or need to earn? These are going to massively affect it. They should be massively affecting the way that you approach pricing. And that's why there isn't a one size fits all, and there isn't a right and wrong. So let's give you some examples. I'll start off with photographer A. Is a 25-year-old, lives alone, has rent of £500 a month. They're doing wedding photography alongside a part-time job, which pays them enough to cover their rent and bills. They don't have a lot of experience and are still learning the craft. They've got modest camera equipment, it gets the job done, but they haven't invested a lot of money into the business at this point. They know the photos are not quite the same standard as the more established photographers in the area, but they book 25 weddings a year in their local area and charge around £1,000 per wedding. They generate a total income of £25,000 a year from weddings, which is more than they get from their other job. And it means that they can easily support their interest in travelling and socialising with friends. So what about your example, Linz?
Okay, so another example may be photographer B, or videographer, is 40 years old. They live with their partner and 2 children. They have a mortgage which is around about £1,500 a month. They've been a wedding photographer for 10 years, and this is their full-time job. They've invested significantly over the years in equipment and education to be right at the top of their game, and they are highly sought after by couples because of the reputation that they've built. Many of their weddings require them to travel nationally or internationally and can sometimes be multi-day events. To enable this, they need to pay other people to assist them and to provide the premium service that they want to be able to give to their clients, so that they can limit the number of weddings that they take on each year. They charge a minimum of £5,000 per wedding, but generate over £10,000 for some of them. They typically do under 15 weddings a year and aim to keep their earnings under the VAT registration limit of £85,000 in the UK. They are not rich, but they live a comfortable lifestyle which allows them to spend time with their family. Now, both of these professionals are very happy.
Yep.
Neither of them is wrong. Neither of them is right. They are just different. But each one has a clear set goal, if you like, with their pricing.
Yeah.
And they've done that because it meets their needs, personal and professional.
Yep.
Now, although these are just two kind of very different examples, of course, there's going to be lots and lots of different variations of, your background, your own circumstances, for all of us within the industry. And for those of you at the various different points within your business journey, as we've said, you'll all be operating within a particular way because of your circumstances, but because of the goals that you've set also. Yeah. And what's important here is that you know why you're charging what you are, or that you're aiming to, that you're trying to just kind of step up to the next level to be able to do. And then you can work out the best way in which you can outline that to couples and start achieving that level of pricing, that level of income.
Cool. So this leads us into quite nicely the section on pricing for success and sustainability. Mm-hmm. So, all right, in the UK, inflation, inflation's been off the charts now for a number of months, hasn't it? Probably about 6 months. All that's been dominating the news is inflation is at like over 10%. I think this is the same in other parts of the world. I don't think it's anything that's just sort of happening here. No. With inflation in the back of the last year, 2022, meant that wages were rising on average of 6.7%. So if you've got a job, whatever job, whether you're in the public or private sector, wages are rising 6.7%. So the reason for bringing that up is, do you think about the fact that if wages are rising 6.7% and your prices haven't risen by 6.7%, that you're now going to be technically behind where average wages are? But also, it's more complicated than that, because when you charge someone for your services, you're not just paying your wage, you are having to pay out for all the costs and all the expenses that you have to consider, as well as your own personal costs and expenses going up for your bills at home, your food, things like that. So there's a benchmark, 6.7%. So if your prices aren't at least kind of 10% higher this year than they were last year, then you are 100% going to be poorer based on what you're charging this year than you were last year. And when you consider that most photographers and videographers, particularly photographers, will book a year or more in advance for their weddings, you're now going to be doing weddings this year at prices you were charging in 2021, 2022. So you're going to be taking a huge hit. You might be 20% behind technically where everybody else is in terms of where wages are. Yeah.
Trickling through already are inquiries for 2025, one for August 2025, and it's February 23 right now. So
who knows where the costs are then? Who knows what inflation is then? Hopefully not as high as it is now anyway. So it's important to think beyond what you think you can charge right now, because you've got to factor in those lead times. And if you don't get this right, it'll slow your growth. It'll slow your growth down. It'll certainly restrict your own, when I say slow growth, it means that you won't be able to spend much money on your business, because you won't have that money in your business to be able to spend on, whether it's, new equipment or something if you need it, investing in yourself, in education, in marketing, in general running of your business. And then also there's the fact that if your living expenses go up, you're probably going to have to take more money out of the business to cover those. Therefore, it's like a double whammy for the business. The business is going to have no money in it. It's going to be just getting by because that any buffer that you'd built up is not going to be there. So it's not just about, that's how you're going to slow your growth down. But what if it actually is that bad that you don't even want to continue? And that's the thing that stops you from being able to do this. And you end up packing it in and going and getting a job because you just can't possibly maintain it. So it's really important that you're thinking about this stuff. That's why pricing is so important. It's not just about the here and now. It's not just about the the bravado and the showing off of like I charge this much. It really is about what happens in a year, what happens in 3 years. Are you going to be at the right place in terms of what you're charging for your services, what people are expecting to pay even? They're getting a bargain if they're getting you at 2020 prices. So it's important. And, you need to... How to ensure your pricing is sustainable is linked closer to our previous 2 podcasts on money and taxes, knowing your numbers. So if you haven't listened to those, we suggest you go away and give those a listen because it'll be really helpful to understand the things we talked about in that and how that relates to the things we're talking about in this episode.
So just then to kind of follow on from what you've just been saying there, Jules, so we're coming into our 6th year in business. So let me just kind of summarise the changes, if you like, that we've seen or that we've experienced in pricing over that past 6 years. And for some of you, it may be less time. For some of you, of course, it may be more than that. So from just our perspective, as I kind of go through this, just consider yourselves how long you've been working within this industry. And can you yourself reflect on what changes you've also seen? So for us, lots and lots of changes in that period of time in terms of the number of people within wedding photography and videography, as well as the technological changes that we've seen in camera equipment that's used, editing software. We now have AI that we can kind of lean on when it comes to our editing, for example, and also different wedding trends as well, and how those have been inspired and influenced by different kind of external things from, social media to still the kind of wedding magazines that we see, celebrity weddings, all that kind of thing. But don't actually think pricing has changed that much if you consider the cost of living, and as you just kind of alluded to in terms of sort of inflation, thinking about that and the way that what kind of thoughts people are having when it comes to budgeting and spending on their wedding, particularly focused on videography and photography. And that's potentially due to a kind of saturation in the market that I think we've seen. This big influx of different suppliers to choose from, not just in photography and videography, but every aspect of weddings. Just in the 6 years that we've been doing it, the new things, the new trends, the new must-haves that we have seen that have now kind of, perhaps what was maybe a list of 15 must-haves for your wedding day is now at maybe 20, 25 must-haves, or so it seems. So there's lots and lots of different suppliers fighting for that kind of lower to kind of mid-end of the market to kind of get a foot in the door, if you like, and they themselves kind of look to build a bit of momentum with their service that they're offering, and build a good reputation as well. But we do think from a video perspective that has become a more desirable service, something that is more sought after now from couples who are getting married. So if you are in some way standing out from the crowd in your particular market, you can probably charge a little more to the clients in the mid-range markets. Yeah. That's also true for photographers, not to exclude you, to some extent, and particularly those, I think we would say, those who have really got to grips with and who have understood and been able to use to their advantage Instagram and kind of Reels, TikTok, that sort of thing. The ones who have really, really
They've probably been able
maximum.
to really bump their prices up.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in proportion to how we would all have normally done it. You would have expected it to be a bit more gradual, and they've been able to kind of raise the prices a lot sooner.
Because I just think there's this additional element of being able to showcase yourself to clients now when it comes to your kind of marketing and the sharing of your work. What once would have been wedding fairs, word of mouth, your own website. Yes, you may have had a social media profile, but it wouldn't have been working as hard as what the potential of it is right now has become. So really, if you're on your A game as far as your Instagram and your TikTok's been concerned, then I think definitely that would have kind of enabled you to certainly increase your pricing and take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah. But the general thing to take away from that is that actually pricing for wedding photography and videography hasn't risen in the same way as what the general inflation and prices of things have. No. If you consider the last 6 years, particularly the last 2 or 3 years. So we wanted to go through brackets for the pricing of what we kind of see for 2023 for photographers and videographers. So this is based on quite a bit of general research that we've done over the past few months. We've done that because we're a bit nosy, and it's for our own interest. It's because we are always trying to figure out what's going on in the market, what people are charging, so that we can make sure we're not that we're necessarily going to make that completely influence what we do, but it's good to know where you are in the market. You should do market research. So we've looked at lots of people's work and websites up and down the country. If I come across somebody I've never heard of before, I always take a look at them and their website. And some people have the pricing on there, so obviously we can see what that is. We can see what they're likely to be charging, although you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, because what people show on the website isn't necessarily what they always charge. But it's a good indication. Some don't list pricing, but I still know through general discussions and just observing what people say and talking to other photographers and videographers, feedback from inquiries that we get, because we do ask our couples if they've booked somebody else to indicate who it was and what they were charging. Sometimes they give us that information, which is very helpful, because it might not be what you were expecting them to charge. So, although this is quite generalised research, it is based on some factual information. We think it's probably quite accurate. So let's go with the brackets a little bit. I'll explain. We're going to have lower mid, upper mid, high end, and then ultra high end. So by low, we mean, someone's getting married in the registry office. Basically, that's the kind of stock place you can get married in the UK if you're listening from elsewhere. A bit like a town hall or something like that. And having your reception at a local pub, or you're not even having a reception necessarily. So somebody who's just wanting the photos, video capturing of basically I'm getting married, and maybe a little bit of a portrait session or a little bit of some speeches or something. But it's not necessarily your big full day lavish wedding affair where you're capturing prep and you're capturing parties and things like that. And they're not going to be spending a vast amount on the wedding in general. They're doing it on a budget. So I would say that is, we're looking at in this country, these are prices for kind of photography and videography, because we're sort of saying they're comparable, not together. So each service, somewhere between £200 and £1,000. Obviously, 200 is really, really low, and anybody who's charging that as a full-time photographer or videographer for a wedding, I just do not know how you can possibly run a business charging £200. Similarly, the sort of top end of that, 1,000, I also don't know how you can charge £1,000 per wedding and be comfortably sustaining that. As your sole income. So the people in this are mainly going to be, I would say, more likely to be people that are doing this on a part-time basis alongside other forms of revenue, the jobs. But I would say that that's a solid market in the UK. I'd say that they're always certainly photographers, maybe not many videographers, but certainly photographers are required in that market. And I do think a lot of videographers will charge those amounts when they're starting out, as will photographers.
Yeah, but because we've heard the term portfolio building lots of times, and that's often where people are starting. Yeah.
So then there's the lower mid-range, which I would say is maybe the biggest market, or certainly this and the next, the upper mid-range market is the biggest market for weddings. In the UK, I would say that people are charging around 1,000 to 1,800 per service in that. And that these are quite large amounts, differences, like 1,000 to 1,800, it's almost double. But that is the sort of range, I would say. And again, that is going to depend on things like the location in the country, the type of venue, and all the other things that we've talked about that are variables. I would say that, that £1,500 mark, I would say is 1,500 to 1,800 is basically the most, I would say, popular amount for both photographers and videographers to charge in this country.
Yeah, and that's, I would, again, without not wanting to just generalise all the time, but I would say that's a full-time photographer, videographer doing high volume each year. Yeah, because they need to.
Yeah, and high volume is like 30, 40, 50, 60 weddings a year. Yeah. And that's obviously that's a large scale as well. But I would say that we'll go on to this, but that's not a bad place to be if you are in your first few years of capturing weddings. Yeah. Because you can make an okay living off it depending on your personal circumstances. Yeah. Yeah, you can run a business off it.
Absolutely, and gaining a ton of experience. All those weddings, goodness, what you can learn. First few years of doing it, if you're young enough, energetic enough, your personal circumstances allow, you've got the time and freedom to be able to do that. And then, personally, you're investing a lot of time into your editing there, aren't you?
Yes.
And absolute advantage of that is that you'll be learning a ton.
Yeah. So if we say that you want to be earning around £1,500, I would say is the sort of target amount as somebody who is in their first few years of doing weddings. £1,500, whether you're a photographer or videographer, for a full day, if this is your full-time gig, I think that is a good amount to be aiming for.
Yeah.
So we then look at the upper mid-range market, which again is quite it's an even bigger stretch, if you like. But these are your sorts of weddings where people are getting married at the nicer venues. We're not talking about luxury weddings. We're talking about nice, very nice weddings that a lot of professional couples will be having. So, again, I'm not going to sort of say exactly who the person is. I'm not going to stereotype the person. But if we say, people that have got professional jobs like teachers, nurses, police officers, maybe better jobs than that as well, and people who've got family members that are going to be paying for the wedding, will be having one of these upper mid-range weddings. And I would say that they're going to be willing to pay anywhere between £1,800 to £3,500 on photo or video. So potentially they're going to spend up to £6,000-7,000 on both of those services. And that's because their weddings are probably going to be costing somewhere between £40,000 and £100,000, which is a lot. It's a crazy amount. And that doesn't sound like, it doesn't sound like to me what I would have thought of when we got married as upper mid-range. I would have thought of that as like a millionaire's wedding. But I just think that now, there are so many people that have got a lot of money and spend a lot of money on weddings that it's sort of brought that average price down. Or average price up even, sorry. So that's kind of your upper mid-range, and that's where we're in at the moment. And I would say that that's where is a good place to be if you aren't looking to be traveling all the time and aren't looking to be doing really kind of posh high-end do's all the time. You'll still get a nice range of different types of venues, different types of couples with this within that bracket, but you're earning decent money.
Yeah, I think, and as you come into talking about the higher end now, I think a major difference between the upper mid there and the higher end will be that there will be the involvement of a wedding planner or planning team, I think, and the higher end, sorry, not to jump in ahead of time there, but, you know, so if we take from 3,500, maybe it's up to around about 10,000, you know, certainly I would expect that you won't be getting contacted by the couples for those weddings. You'd be getting contacted by
a planner. Or somebody who's organising the wedding on their behalf. And that's, you know, so that's that again, 3,500 to 10,000 is a huge bracket.
Gosh, yeah.
But I think that's because we've kind of been on the peripheral of that. We're more in that upper mid-range market, but we have seen, or we have been a part of those weddings, and so there's a definite kind of difference in the way that they generally are planned. But there's not as many of those weddings because we're now starting to talk about people that have got quite a bit of wealth to be able to spend on their wedding. And again, we can range between people who've just done well for themselves and people who come from millionaire families. So we're now talking about a huge kind of range of people, and we've met some really nice people within those sort of ranges. But again, there's probably going to be more travelling expected. There's probably going to be a bit more going on.
Yeah.
And again, these people might be, you know, they might have either really good jobs or they come from a background that is completely different to the one that you're used to. You know, it's a different world. Let's just say that. And then there's the ultra high end, which, you know, where they're going to be paying 10k plus for either photography or videography, anything up to goodness knows how much. And those people are going to be millionaires or billionaires, and that is a very different world. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where things are. It's obviously going to vary between countries, but it's a nice little guide to sort of understand the brackets in relation to pricing. So let's talk about our pricing journey. So considering your pricing journey is important because of the lead times between bookings, which we've already talked about. So lead time between booking the wedding, shooting the wedding. So if you take a job at a price and the wedding's 2 years away, you know, it's something that's potentially going to cause you some problems in a couple of years' time, especially if you are in that initially that when you first start out, you're in that lower range of just a few £100s, and then a couple of years later, you've booked a wedding for say £300-400, but now you're charging £2,000 for a wedding. So you're at a place where you need to be charging £2,000 a wedding and earning £2,000 a wedding, because in order to grow your business, in order to move it along, and in order to support yourself as your full-time job, that's the amount you need to be working with. But you're still having to do weddings at a few £100. That's why it's going to slow your growth. It's going to slow your ability to be able to move forward and do this full time if you've started off part time. So it's important. It's important to consider the journey. And our journey is not typical of most, because we came into this with absolutely no previous experience, and we went full time pretty much straight away. So we weren't really balancing this alongside other jobs. So we didn't have any other income. So we had to make this work very quickly. The other thing is we hadn't really built up that much experience. So a lot of people will second shoot, or they will do lower end weddings and build up to like doing, middle end weddings at a cut price to get the jobs, while they've still got another income. And so they're basically building up quite a good portfolio without having to try and charge decent money to get that portfolio. And we didn't do that. So, that is something that's a little bit different for us. And that's why I'll explain kind of what we did and what we learned from that. We also just did video to start with. So for the first 6 to 12 months, we didn't do photography. We just did video. And then after that, we started doing them together. We started offering a joint photo and video package. And we built up our photography portfolio through doing those joint photo and video packages. We've never really gone into the world of doing photography as our main offering. We do a few photo jobs per year. It's usually for mates, and we're doing them at mates rates, or we would charge them at a similar price to what we charge for our video work at that time. But usually what's more common amongst people in the industry is that you will see more photographers starting off as photographers and becoming well established, and then they start to add things like video highlights in, or they add a video team into their kind of offering, and that's the more common way round of doing it. So our story is a little bit different in relation to that. So how did our journey go? And the reason for telling you this, again, this isn't anything to do with check us out, because we're not charging crazy amounts of money. We're just charging enough to be able to support the business and support our lifestyles. And that's all we want at the moment. That's what we're aiming for. We've managed to do it, but we're not here trying to show off. We're trying to be open and honest about this to give you the insight into what it took and how it kind of evolved. So our first few weddings, we did them completely free. This was like a conscious decision because I'd never shot a wedding before. Lindsay had never shot a wedding before. I have a bit of it's a different topic really, but I have a bit of a policy myself, which is I'm not going to charge someone to do something for the very first time that I ever do it. Until I can prove I can do it and I can do it well, I'm not going to ask someone for money. So I found a way to be able to do a couple of free weddings. One was for a friend of a friend, and one was a friend, and I did them completely free. And that created enough of a portfolio to get going. After that, with quite a few months break, because we weren't really pushing it, we weren't trying to. At this point, it's not really a business. It's not a business at all. It wasn't a business. We weren't charging anything, and we hadn't established any type of business. But we did have a couple of films to show that managed. They weren't the most amazing things in the world, but they managed to get us a few jobs. And over the kind of next few months, we did quite a few jobs that were in the range of £500 to £1,000. So in the first kind of 6 months of being an actual business, we probably did about 10 jobs that were under £1,000. And they, again, bolstered a portfolio, and we learnt a lot. And we also earned some money from them. And with that money, all of that money pretty much at the time, because Lindsay still was working. I had left to do this full time at that point. Lindsay was still working, so she could support us. I pretty much piled all of the money back into the business to be able to get the equipment that I needed to be able to build it going forwards. And it was after that first 6 month period that Lindsay left her full-time job and joined me. So at that point, after around the first 6 to 12 months, we were fully in this full-time with no other income. So by the end of year one, we were at the price range of between £1,200 and £1,500. And I would say that then was a fairly good place to be where we live in the north of England near Leeds. I would say that was a fairly good place to be in terms of when you looked at the peer group. This is back in 2018-ish, the start of 2018-ish. People were around us that were at a similar stage in the business or further on in the business, but at a similar stage in terms of like the work that we were producing, the types of weddings we were doing. That's what people were charging. So we were charging similar to our peers. And then going on from there, years 1 to 2, we put the price up to between 1,500 and 1,800 for video. That was roughly what we were charging. And we started doing photo and video together. We were charging initially for a first few, we were charging around 2,000 for both photo and video. Go on around a year from there, so years 2 to 3. So we're really kind of at that crunch point now. We've got going, we've got a portfolio, we're doing okay in terms of the inquiries that we're receiving. We've managed to kind of find a place in the market where we're offering something that stands out a little bit, which is much harder now, I believe, than it was back then. So years 2 to 3, we were charging between 1,800 and 2,300 for video and between 2,500 and 3,000 for both photo and video together. And I'll be honest, at that point, we were feeling quite happy in terms of being able to get to that point of what we were charging within that amount of time. However, the difficulty was that when I look back on the figures and I think about the amount of weddings that we had to do that year, in order to make enough money, we had to do too many weddings to be able to make the sort of money that we needed to generate. And that's exactly why we're so passionate when we talk about things like pricing and we talk about other things to do with your business, because if you're not working on this stuff early on and you don't get this right, it can be very difficult to keep going and keep it sustained. And we had to work really hard. This is back in 2019. We had to work really hard that year, and I did feel quite burnt out by the end of it. But that's all part of building a business. But in hindsight, it taught me that we needed to charge more. And the plan for the next year was to be charging more. However, 2020 is when COVID happened. So for the next 2 years, we've got this really strange area of we were charging a good amount, and then there were some bookings that had booked a couple of years earlier that didn't end up happening because they got postponed. So there was gaps of like 4 years or more between when someone had booked back in 2018 at those prices and when their wedding ended up taking place in 2022. Some of these people are paid in full and everything, and it was, we were literally doing weddings for free. Some of the time we were taking on smaller micro weddings in order to just generate a little bit of money, so we were doing these at a lower amount. I'm sure lots of people can relate to doing that through COVID. And it was just generally, there was just such a mismatch, such a mix of prices that we were charging because of when these weddings had been booked, when they were taking place. Even, and then you're still booking new weddings in amongst this period and charging a lot more than you've ever charged before for them. But then the next week you could be doing, you could be charging £4,000 to £5,000 for a wedding, and then the next week you're doing one that you charged less than £2,000 for, and just quite a sort of strange experience. And it's also what led to teaching us that you don't know what's around the corner, and so you can't you've got to think ahead. It's really important to be planning ahead and thinking about where you're going to be down the line, and not just a year, not just 2 years, but what if something like COVID happens? So, year 6, where are we now? Typically, for video, it does range a little bit, but we're solidly now charging between 2,500 and 3,000. Sometimes, a little bit more. And then for both photo and video, we're charging between 3,700 and 4,700. So at those prices, this is where it becomes really, really important, because there's no way I could have anticipated that we could have been having a conversation about realistically charging that much for weddings. Bearing in mind, there are people that charge a lot more than that. There are people that will charge 5, 10, 20 grand a wedding, right? So there are people charging a lot more than that. But for us to be able to charge that for a wedding, there's no way 5 years earlier, or maybe even 3 years earlier, we could have anticipated being able to do that. And that's now our price point. That's now what we're aiming to be able to charge for every wedding. And we've only been able to do that because we've stuck to a particular strategy. We haven't just made it up as we've gone along. We've been really careful to look at the figures, to consider what we really need, and to work on getting to this point, because that is the only way we knew we could do this and have a decent lifestyle, so that we weren't working ridiculous. There are times over the last 5 years that I've just not stopped. I've not taken a day off. I've not taken any holidays. It's just been work, because that's what is required. And you can do that for a short period of time, but I don't want to do that forever. And the only way to be able to not do that is to be able to charge appropriately. Hence why pricing is so important. So, a strategy for sustainable pricing. 2 of the most popular pricing strategies that get discussed in business are cost-based pricing, where you are looking at what it costs you to do your business and what you need to kind of make out of it to make it worth your while. And then that's what you're charging. And then there is value-based pricing, which is actually considering what you are bringing to the client. So what is the client getting from you? What will that do for them? So if you're offering a service to a company that's going to make a lot of money, for example, if you are helping them market a product that if they sell a lot of, that will make them a lot of money, then in those circumstances, you are bringing a lot of value to that client. Obviously, it's slightly different for us as wedding photographers and videographers, because value-based pricing in this context is we are creating these memories that will last for their lives. They're going to be able to enjoy these memories forever. And that is actually why people will pay, because either they value those memories or they value some cool looking shit that you're going to create for them. And that is potentially priceless. And it is about how you portray that, how you put that across, how you sell that to people. But also it's about how much they value that, whether it's cool looking shit or whether it's those memories. And there are other things that are important. There are other things that you bring value to. For instance, if someone wants to look really, really good on their wedding day and they want a particular editorial type look for their wedding photos or video, and that's what you do, and they've seen it and they want that, then whatever you charge within reason is going to be worth it to them. If they have that money available. To other people, they might want the memories. It's really important to preserve memories, but they don't want a fuss. They don't want a big deal. They don't like their photo taking. They don't want a video camera in their face all day. But the memories are important. So if that's what you're offering, then again, to them, that is going to be a high value product. So you need to work out, and this is another topic that we'll talk about probably another day, but you need to work out what you're giving to people, and you need to work out why they should choose you, and you need to sell that to them. Not in a salesy way, but you need to make sure that it's clear what you offer. So between cost-based pricing and value-based pricing, we're going to finish up with a mixture of those two, so that we can suggest to you a really actionable strategy which combines them, and it helps you to understand how to set your pricing. So here goes. Here are our steps to pricing. Step one is going to be to understand your personal living costs, your costs of doing business, taxes, and your target amount of profit for the year. Okay, we don't look at per wedding, we look at a financial year or whatever year you want to look at, but we need to look at it in a context of a longer period of time than week to week or wedding to wedding. We need to research our competitors. Step two, we need to research our competitors, analyze different markets, because then we know if we come up with a figure that we want to be able to charge and we've got a plan in place, that's what we're going to charge. Is that going to sit right in the market that we're in currently? Right? Am I going to be able to charge that in this market? Am I going to look ridiculously expensive compared to everybody else? But my work or the other things that I'm bringing value to don't stand out enough. So, that's important to understand that bit, because if the answer to that question, if you look into those things, you do your research and you go, well, I can't charge that in this market, you're going to have to move markets. And then you're going to be asking yourself that question, is that really what I want to do? So that comes on to step three. You're going to provide an honest self-assessment of your own abilities and where you currently are in relation to your peers. So are you as good as them? Are you bringing something either the same or better, more than what your peers are bringing to the table? Because if you're not, then you're probably not able to compete on price. So then you're going to be looking at, other things like, are you just better at marketing? Are you better at selling? Are you relating to couples that aren't really looking at the work? They're looking at other things. Number four, establish your own pricing goals and set some realistic timescales to achieve them. All right, pricing is a journey. It's something that requires a little bit of flexibility. It's unlikely that you charge the same price for every single wedding, or that you will charge exactly what you want to on day one. So there are always going to be reasons why you might charge more or less for the same wedding, but just in different circumstances, a different client, a different location. You might, you're going to be offering the same thing, but it might change. There might be some changes within what you actually offer. So again, this is more to do with the packages, which we will talk about in the future, but what are you offering people? And that's another thing. If you see another wedding photographer or another wedding videographer offering something at a certain price and you're thinking, well, that's more than what I charge, or that's lower than what I charge, but it's irrelevant if you're not actually giving like for like service. Two people could be charging the same amount, but they're offering, one's doing less hours or more hours, one's offering a different edit or different products after the date. Like, you see a lot of people who might be charging the same price. As one photographer charges X amount for a digital only package, and then another photographer charges exactly the same amount, but is including like a family bundle of albums and prints and all sorts. Well, they're not the same because there's no cost involved in the digital side of things apart from the time, whereas the other one has got to buy a load of products, which might not be that expensive, but there's still a cost there. So, they're not making the same amount of money. So you need to consider these things, and you need to, you're not going to charge what you want to charge on day one. You've got to work up to it a little bit, but also you shouldn't be scared of getting to where you want to be as quickly as possible. That would be, I'll come on to a bit of advice at the end, but that would be something that I would be definitely considering. Number 5, you need to have a goal of where you want to be in the future. You need to set realistic timescales. That links nicely to the previous point because you might not be charging what you want on day one. If you consider the pricing journey that we went on, we went from free to like 500 quid, under 1,000, 1,200, 1,500, 2,000, and then up and up. But it didn't happen overnight. That was a period of a few years to be able to do that and to be able to do it confidently. Doing it one time, putting the prices on your website and nobody books, or sending quotes out and nobody bites, is not charging that price. You're only charging that price when you're consistently booking that package. You're consistently booking at that price. So, you're not going to be charging it straight away. Have a goal and set some timescales of how long you need to achieve it, because it's going to lead to business growth. It's going to lead to satisfying your personal circumstances. So have those timescales, and if you're not meeting those timescales, examine why. Look at what it is that you aren't doing that you could be doing to achieve it. This is exactly why we're offering this help and advice, because otherwise you're just going through it blind and you don't really know. You just kind of, I'll charge this, and then you realise it's not enough, so you charge a bit more. Whereas if you've got a plan, you can actually say, well, I can work more weddings for a period of 2 years, but by year 3 or 4, I need to be earning this much per wedding so that I don't have to do 60 weddings a year. Number 6, establish a happy price. It will change at different points, but establish a happy price. And what I mean by this is it's your lowest price per wedding that you're going to do, and you won't typically go below that price. It's got to be based on your overall revenue target for the year, divided by the number of weddings that you either can or want to do. So, if you charge £1,000 and you need to make 30,000 weddings a year at £30,000 a year, and you're happy to do 30 weddings, then that's cool. But if someone comes to you and says, will you do it for 500, you're going to say no. Or if they say you're going to do it for 800, you're going to say no. Even if you really kind of think, well, I'm not busy and it's an inquiry, you're not going to take that wedding, because you know that in order to achieve the financial goal that you have, you would have to then stretch yourself over that 30 weddings, and you're not in a position to do that. So even though it might seem like a good idea in the short term, going below that happy price is not a good idea when you take into consideration the overall factors. You're going to regret it. I'll be honest, this is from experience. I've always regretted it, right? Apart from when I was first starting out and I was very flexible. If somebody comes now and tries to get you to do something cheaper and you think, well, I'm not busy, I usually end up regretting it. So, this way you are going to kind of meet your revenue targets based on your costs and what you need to sustain your personal circumstances and your business. And then number 7, once you reach your forecasted target for each year, so that happy price number in terms of like overall revenue, so it could be 30,000 for the year, it could be 40,000 for the year. Then at that point, okay, it's a good time to put your price up. And you should put it up by a decent amount based on the work that you're creating. So again, you should be considering where you are in terms of your ability, in terms of your confidence, in terms of where you are with your peers. And you should put it up based on like the demand for your services and the numbers of inquiries you're getting. So if you think I'm getting quite a lot of inquiries, people are booking me, and you've reached your forecasted amount, and people are still inquiring for that, for that year offer next year, I think that's a really good time to put your price up, because you will see by doing that there's low risk because you've already reached your kind of financial goals for that year. And you'll find that if you give it a bit of time, people will pay that increased amount. And that is definitely at the moment a really good way of dealing with the inflation situation that we're experiencing. And I'm not just saying this because I'm trying to get you to potentially do something that I wouldn't be prepared to do. This is exactly what we do. This is how we do this. And that's those 7 steps are a really good way to approach pricing so that you're not just making it up, but you're not kind of just being too scared to progress your pricing. You've got a plan and you're working through it. And if you need to drop back down, you always can. But it's unlikely that for a long period of time that you're going to need to do that. You should always be edging up a little bit. And this process should be revisited periodically. You should be reviewing this at least once every year, maybe even once every 6 months. You really don't want to let your confidence dictate your pricing. Make sure you're earning what you need to, and beyond that, you can ask for realistically what you think you're worth and what people will pay based on the market that you want to work in. Again, that's really important because we could all go and just say, well, I'm going to aim for the luxury market. But you might not enjoy working at those luxury weddings. You might find it difficult to change from a situation where you're dealing with couples that are getting married fairly local to you to having to deal with planners and travel quite some distance and have quite a lot of pressure and feel quite uncomfortable, and that might not be worth it to you. So it's about you feeling confident about what you do, what you want to do, and using that strategy to dictate your pricing rather than letting the customer dictate your pricing because you don't feel confident and you just feel desperate. Think about what value is your work worth to the couple. We talked about value pricing. You're going to establish this through trial and error and experimentation. If someone's willing to pay an amount, then it's worth it. If you send a quote out to someone and you're not in a position where you desperately need that job, as in you've got enough work on, you can cover all the costs, you can cover your bills, you're not going to be without, mortgage payments and food, and your business is going to be fine, then that's a really great time to, if an inquiry comes in, if inquiries are coming in, to push your pricing up and see whether you are worth more than what you've been getting previously. If you only need a couple of people to book, you put your price up, you only need a couple of people to book at that price, and you soon feel more confident about charging that amount. Then that becomes the norm. And then sometime later, you do the same again. This is basically how you're going to progress your pricing if that's what you're trying to do. Obviously, everybody's different. Everyone's got a different, like we started off by talking about, everybody has a different goal. And your goal might be, I'm quite happy doing this part-time and working very locally at very low pressure weddings where, they're not expecting full day. They're expecting short coverage. They're expecting simple wedding photos or a simple video recording of the ceremony or whatever. And if that's the case and you're happy doing that and you have another job or something like that, that's great. What we're talking about here is if you want to be able to not burn out, not work your ass off all the time, okay, have a normal existence where you work a normal amount of hours and you're able to enjoy your life and have a decent lifestyle because you've got enough money to live, and you want to have something that will be successful and sustainable for the long run, as in not do it for 2 or 3 years and then pack it in, as in I'm going to do this for the next 10 plus 15, 20 years of my life, that's why we're talking about this sort of pricing situation, this successful, sustainable model of pricing. All right, biggest 2 pieces of advice I can give is to, when you increase your price, give it time. Don't make any snap decisions. Don't start lowering it back down straight away. Don't think, I've had 20 inquiries and I've not converted any, and previously I would have converted at least half of those. You can't judge it just on a couple of months. Obviously, if after 6 to 12 months you've not booked a wedding, you really do need to be looking at what the disconnect is, and you need to be honest with yourself about it. You maybe even need to be asking for feedback, and that's something that we do with every inquiry. We don't necessarily get it all the time, but if somebody doesn't book with us, we always ask why not. Like, what's the reason? Was it price? What were you wanting to pay? Things like that. Or if it was someone else, who did you book? What led to that decision? 9 times out of 10, it's pricing. And then the second thing is to charge more earlier on in your journey, because honestly, if we could go back, I would have definitely, knowing what I know now, definitely put our prices up higher quicker, because I now know that we could have charged more. And what it would have led to is just a faster process of doing less weddings, but earning the same amount of money. And that is the best way to finish this off, because it might not be, and I've heard this so many times from people, it might not be your goal to do fewer weddings, because you might enjoy being busy, you might enjoy doing lots of weddings, you might have processes in place that means you don't edit any of them, so you don't have the post-production. You go shoot the wedding, that's the bit you love being around people, you love doing 3, 4, 5 weddings a week, and you love then not having to handle the edit and just hand over the files to someone, somebody else edits it, you deliver it, and you basically are happy with that model, and you're happy with the amount that you're charging to run that model. But honestly, at some point, I do think your circumstances will change. What if you get poorly? What if you, didn't have children, then you have children? What if you just kind of start to go off weddings, but you've got a ridiculous amount booked and you're already burnt out and you've got to keep going? And that is why, putting your prices up to not to like ridiculous amounts, but to a reasonable amount as early as possible is, I do believe, is key to having a successful and sustainable wedding photography or videography business. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope you can take some really useful, actionable information away from this. I'm sorry if you've had to listen to me droning on for the past sort of 15-20 minutes without a break and without Lindsay. She's had to go and pick up our daughter from school, so she had to leave. Now, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, please DM us on Instagram at Wedding Mavericks. You can email us at info@weddingmavericks.com. And if you have enjoyed any of the podcasts, including today's or any of the others, please just give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, on Neil said iTunes, then, or wherever you're listening to this. You can watch it on YouTube. Obviously, you're going to see, if you do that, you'll see Lindsay disappear halfway through. And the last thing to say is thank you for listening and for tuning in, everyone, and take care of yourselves. We'll see you again next week. Bye.